Please, don't touch me, she pleaded. But he did. Next day, 300 warriors came for her. 300 warriors don't just appear overnight. Not for anyone, not for anything ordinary. Silas Ward learned this when he woke to the sound of hoofbeats that seemed to go on forever. A thundering that shook the wooden walls of his trading post and rattled every bottle on his shelves. He stumbled to his window, still half drunk from the night before, expecting to see maybe a dozen riders at most. The horizon was black with them. They sat motionless on their horses, arranged in perfect lines that stretched beyond what his eyes could follow. No war paint, no raised weapons, just silence that felt heavier than any threat he'd ever heard. In the center, an older man with silver braids waited, his gaze fixed on Silas's door with the patience of stone. But here's what made no sense. Yesterday, when the girl had begged him not to touch her, when she'd spoken those exact words in broken English while backing toward his storage room, she hadn't seemed important. Just another native who'd wandered into his post looking for work. He'd grabbed her wrist, forced her to stay, made her stack his goods despite her tears. It was business, nothing more. So why were they here? And why, when Silas looked closer, could he see that each warrior carried something small and white tied to their saddle, something that looked almost like bones? The girl was nowhere to be seen, but on his doorstep lay a single eagle feather, placed with ceremonial precision. Silas had been in the territory long enough to know that feathers didn't appear by accident. They meant something. They were messages. He just had no idea what message 300 armed men were trying to send him, or why a simple grab of a girl's wrist had apparently broken some rule he didn't even know existed. The day before, Silas Ward had thought himself the smartest man in the territory. His trading post sat at the crossroads where three trails met, and every traveler who needed supplies had to deal with him. He set the prices, he made the rules, and he took what he wanted when he wanted it. That morning, she had walked into his store like any other customer, a young native woman, maybe 20, with long black hair braided down her back and wearing a simple dress that had seen better days. She moved carefully between his shelves, touching nothing, examining his goods with the focused attention of someone who had very little money to spend. Silas watched her from behind his counter, calculating. She was alone, which was unusual. Native women rarely traveled without family or tribal protection. She kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone, but no one came. "You need work?" he called out, not really asking. She turned, and he saw something in her dark eyes that should have warned him. Fear, yes, but something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if she knew who he was before he knew who she was. "I can pay," she said quietly, holding up a small leather pouch. "For flour, sugar, medicine." But Silas was already moving around the counter. He'd been alone at this post for 3 months, and the sight of a young woman stirring something hungry in his chest. Business was slow, and he was tired of taking orders from everyone who rode through. Here was someone he could control. "Work's easier than coin," he said, stepping closer. "Store needs cleaning. Goods need organizing. You help me, I help you." She backed toward the wall, the fear in her eyes growing sharper. "Please, I have money. I just need—" "Please don't touch me," she whispered when he reached for her arm. The word stopped him for maybe half a second. There was something desperate in how she said it, something that went beyond normal fear. But Silas had been drinking since noon, and the whiskey made him bold in all the wrong ways. He grabbed her wrist anyway, felt her try to pull away, saw tears start in her eyes. "You'll work," he said, dragging her toward the storage room. "Few hours, then you can buy whatever you need." She didn't fight him, which surprised him, just went still and silent, like an animal playing dead. But when he looked at her face, he saw something that should have terrified him. Not submission, not defeat, acceptance. As if she'd been expecting this moment her entire life. As if everything that came next had already been decided long before he'd ever grabbed her wrist. Hours later, after she'd stacked his goods and swept his floors in perfect silence, she asked a question that made his blood turn cold. "Do you know my father's name?" Silas had laughed at her question about her father, laughed until his belly hurt and whiskey tears ran down his cheeks. "Sweetheart, I don't know any of your people's names. You all look the same to me." She hadn't reacted to the insult, just stood there holding a sack of flour, waiting for his amusement to die down. When the silence stretched too long, Silas wiped his eyes and tried to focus on her face through the alcohol haze. Why would I care about your daddy? Because tomorrow you will meet him. The way she said it made the laughter stick in his throat. Not like a threat, not like a promise, like a simple fact, the way someone might say the sun would rise or winter would come. Is that supposed to scare me? Silas reached for the bottle on his counter, needing another drink to wash away the strange chill her words had brought. She tilted her head, studying him with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. You drink because you are lonely. You touch women because you are weak. You take what is not yours because you believe no one will stop you. Each word hit like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Who the hell are you two? My name is Ayana, she said, cutting him off. It means eternal blossom in my people's tongue. My father chose it because he said I would outlive everything that tried to destroy me. Something in her tone made Silas set down his bottle. The way she spoke her name, with reverence and pride, as if it carried weight beyond simple identification, as if it meant something to someone important. Ayana, she repeated, watching his face carefully. Daughter of Crow Feather, chief of the Mountain Wind Tribe. The blood drained from Silas's face. Every trader in the territory knew that name. Crow Feather controlled the northern passes, decided which caravans lived and which disappeared into the mountains. He was the one man even the army avoided confronting directly. You're lying. When I was 7, Ayana continued as if he hadn't spoken, a white settler grabbed my sister, used her, threw her away like refuse. My father took 300 warriors and burned his homestead to ash. The man begged for mercy, promised money, offered horses. My father gave him the same mercy the man had shown my sister. Silas's hands started shaking. He reached for his gun, but Ayana just shook her head sadly. Violence will not help you now. You have already broken the sacred law. What sacred law? I just made you work. I didn't. To touch the unmarked daughter of a chief without permission is to claim her as your woman. You have declared yourself my husband in the eyes of my people. The words hit Silas like a physical blow. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto a wooden crate behind the counter. That's not. I didn't know. I was just. My father taught me that ignorance is not innocence. A man who acts without knowledge of consequences must still pay for what he destroys. Outside, the wind had begun to pick up, rattling the windows of the trading post. But underneath that sound, carried on the evening air, came something else. Something that made Ayana smile for the first time since entering his store. The distant thunder of approaching horses. The thunder grew louder as darkness fell, but it wasn't storm clouds bringing the noise. Through his window, Silas watched torches appear on the horizon like fallen stars, moving in perfect formation across the valley floor. The sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, multiplying until it seemed like the earth itself was shaking. Ayana had positioned herself by the door, no longer the frightened girl who'd begged him not to touch her. She stood straight and calm, as if she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. Every few minutes, she would tilt her head toward the approaching sound and nod slightly, like she was counting something only she could hear. How many? Silas asked, his voice cracking like a boy's. 300, as tradition demands. For what? For touching your arm? That's insane. Ayana turned to face him, and in the lamplight, he could see she was no longer the same person who'd walked into his store. There was something regal in her bearing now, something that spoke of bloodlines and ancient laws that white men had never bothered to understand. You did not just touch my arm, she said quietly. You declared ownership. In my culture, when an unmarked woman is seized against her will by a man from outside the tribe, it is either marriage or war. There is no middle ground. Silas fumbled for his rifle, checking the chamber with shaking hands. Then I'll fight. I'll show them they can't just... With what? 6 bullets against 300 warriors? Ayana shook her head. My father brings enough men to witness. Not to battle. This is ceremony, not war. Ceremony for what? Before she could answer, the hoofbeats stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the thunder had been. Silas pressed his face to the window and saw them arranged in the moonlight, a sea of mounted figures that stretched beyond the reach of his lamp's glow. They sat motionless as statues, waiting. A single rider broke from the formation and approached the trading post. Even in the darkness, Silas could see the man's massive frame, the silver braids that caught the starlight, the way his horse obeyed his slightest touch. This had to be Crow Feather. The chief dismounted and walked to the door with measured steps. He didn't knock, didn't call out, just stood there waiting for the door to open as if he had all the time in the world. What does he want? Silas whispered. Ayanna was already reaching for the door handle. To offer you a choice. What choice? She paused, her hand on the wood, and looked back at him with something that might have been pity. Honor the marriage you created, or face the justice you've earned. The door swung open, and Crow Feather stepped inside. Up close, he was even more imposing than Silas had imagined. Tall as a tree, with scars that told stories of battles won and enemies conquered. His dark eyes found Silas immediately and held him pinned like a bug under glass. When Crow Feather spoke, his voice carried the weight of mountains. You touched my daughter. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment that had already been passed. Silas tried to find his voice, tried to explain that it had all been a misunderstanding, but the words died in his throat under Crow Feather's stare. The chief stood in the doorway like a force of nature, and behind him, the night was filled with the quiet breathing of 300 horses and the soft creak of leather saddles. I didn't know, Silas finally managed. I didn't know she was your daughter. I didn't know about your laws. Crow Feather stepped fully into the store, and Silas noticed he moved without making any sound at all. Everything about the man spoke of deadly precision, from the way he held his shoulders to the calculated placement of each footstep. Ignorance, the chief said slowly, is the excuse of children and cowards. Which are you? Ayanna moved to stand beside her father, and Silas saw the family resemblance clearly now. The same proud bearing, the same unflinching gaze that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. She whispered something in her native tongue, and Crow Feather nodded once. My daughter tells me you were drinking when you seized her, that you forced her to work against her will, that you ignored her pleas. Each word was delivered like a physical blow. Is this true? Silas looked around his store as if searching for some escape route that didn't exist. His rifle leaned against the wall, useless. His back door led to nothing but open country where 300 warriors waited. He was trapped, and everyone in the room knew it. It wasn't, I just needed help with the store. It was business. Business. Crow Feather repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. You call forced labor business. You call seizing a woman against her will business. He took another step closer. Tell me, traitor, what business gives a man the right to ignore a woman's tears? The question hung in the air like smoke. Silas realized he had no answer that wouldn't make him sound like exactly what he was. A drunk man who'd taken what he wanted because he could. In your world, Crow Feather continued, perhaps such things go unpunished. But you touch the daughter of a chief. By our law, you have claimed her as your bride. This makes you my son, whether you intended it or not. Silas felt a flicker of hope. Son-in-law sounded better than enemy. Then we can work this out. I can make amends. Pay compensation. Crow Feather's expression didn't change. A son who dishonors his family brings shame on all who share his name. In our tribe, shame is cleansed only through blood or exile. The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. What does that mean? It means, Ayanna said quietly, that you must choose. Prove yourself worthy of being my husband through trial by combat, or leave this territory forever and never return. Outside, as if summoned by her words, came a new sound, the rhythmic beating of drums, deep and primal, that seemed to make the very walls of the trading post vibrate. The ceremony was beginning, whether Silas was ready or not. The drumming grew louder, joined by voices chanting in a language Silas couldn't understand. Through the window he watched warriors dismount and begin forming a circle around his trading post. Each man carried weapons, but they held them loosely, ceremonially, as if this wasn't about killing but about something far more serious. Crow Feather gestured toward the door. Come, the tribe waits to see what manner of man claims their chief's daughter. Silas's legs felt like water. What if I choose exile? What if I just leave? Then you run like a coward, and my daughter's honor remains stained by your touch forever. The chief's voice carried no emotion, just cold fact. She will be marked as the woman no man would fight for. She will never marry, never bear children, never take her rightful place in the tribe. Ayanna stepped forward, and for the first time since her father's arrival, she spoke directly to Silas. You have already changed my life forever. The question now is whether you will destroy it completely, or find the courage to face what you have done. I'm not a fighter, Silas said desperately. I'm a trader. I sell goods. I don't know how to use weapons properly. Then you should have thought of that before you seized a chief's daughter, Crowfeather replied. But our law is not without mercy. You may choose your trial. What does that mean? Ayanna translated something her father said in their native tongue. Traditional combat with blades, or the test of endurance. In the test of endurance, you must survive 3 days and nights in the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on your back. If you return alive, you prove yourself worthy. If you die, the debt is paid. Silas looked between father and daughter, searching for some hint of compassion in their faces. He found none. These people lived by codes he'd never bothered to learn, followed laws older than any government he'd ever known. And if I win, if I survive, then you become my husband, Ayanna said simply. You leave your old life behind and join our tribe. You learn our ways, follow our customs, and prove every day that you deserve the honor you claimed through force. The weight of it all crashed down on Silas at once. There was no way out that didn't cost him everything. Fight and probably die. Run and live as a coward who destroyed an innocent woman's life. Survive the wilderness test and lose his freedom forever. But as he looked at Ayanna's face in the lamplight, he saw something that stopped his panicking thoughts cold. She wasn't gloating over his predicament. She wasn't angry or vengeful. She looked almost sad, as if she was watching a man realize too late what his choices had cost. Why? He asked her. Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you tell me who you were? Because, she said quietly, I wanted to see what kind of man you truly were. My father taught me that a person's character is revealed not by their strength, but by how they treat those who cannot fight back. Outside, the chanting reached a crescendo, and Crowfeather placed his hand on the door handle. The tribe grows restless. You must choose now, or they will choose for you. Silas closed his eyes, knowing that whatever decision he made in the next few seconds would determine whether he lived or died as a man worth respecting. Silas opened his eyes and looked at his hands. The same hands that had grabbed Ayanna's wrist without permission. The same hands that had forced her to work while she pleaded with him to stop. For the first time in years, he saw them clearly for what they were. Not the hands of a successful businessman, but the hands of a man who took what he wanted because he could. The wilderness test, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Crowfeather nodded once as if he'd expected this choice. 3 days, 3 nights. You begin at sunrise tomorrow. If you return to this spot alive and whole, my daughter will be your wife, and you will be my son. And if I don't return, then your bones will teach the coyotes that some debts can only be paid with blood. Ayanna stepped closer to Silas, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. You asked me why I didn't fight back. I will tell you now, because my grandmother had a vision about this day when I was born. She saw a white man who would touch me without permission, and she saw what would come after. Silas felt his throat tighten. What did she see? She saw 2 paths. In one, the man would run like a coward, and I would live my life in shame. In the other, he would find courage he didn't know he possessed, and both our lives would be forever changed. The words hit Silas like physical blows. He'd thought this was all coincidence, bad luck, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Ayanna was telling him this had all been foreseen, that his choices had been watched and waited for since before he was born. That's impossible. How could anyone know? My grandmother lived to be 97 years old, Ayanna interrupted. She taught me that the future is not fixed like stone, but flows like water. Every choice creates new currents, new possibilities. Your choice today will determine which future becomes real. Outside, the drumming stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Silas could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Crowfeather moved toward the door, and the time for questions had clearly ended. You will have no weapons, the chief said without turning around. No food, no water, no tools except your hands and whatever wisdom you possess. The wilderness will test not just your body but your spirit. Many men enter the sacred grounds. Not all emerge as men. The door opened, and cool night air rushed into the trading post. Beyond the threshold, Silas could see the circle of warriors waiting in the moonlight. Each face was painted with white and red patterns that looked like symbols of war and death, but their expressions held no hatred, only the solemn gravity of men witnessing an ancient ritual. Ayanna walked to a wooden chest in the corner of the store and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small piece of carved bone hanging from a leather cord. This belonged to my grandmother, she said. approaching Silas. She wore it through 77 winters, and it never failed to bring her home. She held it out to him. If you truly wish to prove yourself worthy, you will earn the right to wear it. Silas stared at the simple necklace, understanding that she was offering him far more than just protection. She was offering him a chance to become something better than what he'd been. But first, he had to survive 3 days in country that had killed stronger men than him. The sun had barely risen when Crow Feather led Silas to the edge of the sacred territory. The chief pointed toward a line of jagged peaks that rose like broken teeth against the morning sky. Between here and there lay miles of desert, rocky canyons, and wilderness that had claimed the lives of experienced hunters. You go alone from here, Crow Feather said. Follow the old deer trails north until you reach the circle of standing stones. Touch the center stone with your bare hand, then return. 3 days, 3 nights. Silas looked down at his soft trader's clothes and city boots, already knowing they wouldn't last a day in this country. What if I get lost? Then you die lost. The chief's expression softened almost imperceptibly. But if you truly wish to earn my daughter's respect, you will find your way. Fear makes men weak. Purpose makes them strong. With that, Crow Feather mounted his horse and rode back toward the camp, leaving Silas alone with nothing but the clothes on his back and the weight of his choices pressing down like the desert sun. The first day nearly killed him. His boots rubbed blisters that burst and bled. His throat burned with thirst by noon, and he spent precious hours searching for water instead of making progress toward the distant peaks. When night fell, he huddled behind a boulder, shivering as the temperature dropped 40 degrees from its daytime high. But something happened during that first miserable night. As Silas lay there listening to coyotes howl in the darkness, he started thinking about Ayana's face when she'd begged him not to touch her, the real fear in her eyes, the way she'd gone still and silent when he'd grabbed her, like a small animal trapped by a predator. For the first time in his adult life, Silas felt genuine shame for something he'd done. The second day was worse. His lips cracked and bled. His hands were torn raw from climbing over sharp rocks. But he kept moving north, driven by something stronger than his body's complaints. Every step toward those distant peaks was a step away from the man who'd forced a young woman to work against her will. On the second night, he found water in a small spring hidden between 2 boulders. As he drank, careful not to waste a single drop, he thought about all the times he'd taken things for granted. Water from his well, food from his shelves, power over people who couldn't fight back. The third day broke clear and cold. Silas crested a ridge and saw them in the distance. 7 ancient stones arranged in a perfect circle, each one taller than a man. They looked like guardians watching over the valley. Older than any settlement, older than any law except the ones written in human hearts. He reached the circle as the sun touched the western horizon. The center stone was smooth granite, worn by countless hands that had touched it before his. When Silas pressed his palm against its surface, he felt the coolness seep into his burning skin. Now came the hardest part. 3 days back, with no food and only whatever water he could find along the way. Silas collapsed at the trading post exactly as the sun set on the third day. His clothes were torn to rags, his face burned dark by the desert sun, and his hands were cut so badly they left bloody prints on the wooden steps. But he was alive, and more importantly, he was changed. Crow Feather and Ayana had been waiting for him. The chief knelt beside Silas and examined his wounds with the practiced eye of a warrior who'd seen men tested by the wilderness before. "You look like death," Crow Feather said, but there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before, something that might have been respect. "I feel worse than death," Silas croaked through cracked lips. "But I made it. I touched the stone." Ayana brought him water, supporting his head as he drank slowly. "Tell me what you learned out there." Silas looked up at her, and she saw that his eyes were different now. The arrogance was gone, burned away by 3 days of facing his own mortality. In its place was something harder to define, humility perhaps, or the beginning of wisdom. "I learned that I've been taking things that weren't mine my whole life," he said quietly. "Water, food, safety, your dignity." He struggled to sit up, wincing as his torn hands pressed against the wooden steps. "I learned that being strong enough to take something doesn't mean you deserve to have it." Crow Feather stood and walked to where his horse waited. From his saddlebags, he withdrew a bundle of clean clothes and a pair of moccasins made from soft deerskin. "These belong to my younger brother," the chief said. "He died fighting to protect our winter camp from raiders." He was a good man who understood that true strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. Silas accepted the clothes with shaking hands. I'm honored, but I need to ask you both something. He looked between father and daughter. I know I have to marry Ayanna now. I know that's the law, but I need her to know that I'll spend the rest of my life earning the right to call myself her husband. I'll never again take something from her that she doesn't freely give. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but not unkind. You have proven you can survive in the wilderness. Now you must prove you can survive in a marriage built on respect instead of force. I'll learn your language, Silas said. Your customs, your ways of seeing the world. I'll work every day to become the kind of man who deserves to stand beside a chief's daughter. Crowfeather nodded slowly. Words are wind until they become actions. But you have taken the first step on a very long path. He mounted his horse and looked down at them both. The ceremony will be held when the moon is full. Until then, you will live with our people and prove that your transformation is real, not just something you wear like new clothes. As the chief rode away, Ayanna helped Silas to his feet. He was weak and wounded, but for the first time since she'd walked into his store, he looked at her with genuine respect. I know I can't erase what I did, he said, but I promise you this. Every day for the rest of my life, I'll try to be worthy of the second chance you've given me. Ayanna nodded, and in her eyes, he saw not love, but something that might grow into it, given time and patience and the daily choice to be better than he'd been before. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where honor and redemption collide in the unforgiving frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.